My name is Kaji Dosha, and it is my honor and pleasure to be with you today as we come together to talk about a really important issue. We're obviously headed into a new time, a new era, and we are very interested in organizing and informing each other about where we are and where we need to be. So my name is Kaji Dosha. I'm senior pastor of Park Avenue Christian Church in Manhattan, and I'm also chair of the board for New Sanctuary Coalition. So I wanted to let you know a few things about our security protocols. We have disabled the chat for security reasons. And just to be explicit about that, we are well aware that DHS, instead of doing their own job, often will surveil us. So if you're on the call, we encourage you, DHS, to actually log off and go do what would be more helpful in securing the nation. But at any rate, we will be disabling the chat. We have Q&A. However, and we're going to try to answer as many questions so that we can get as many in by text. So just like put your question in the Q&A and someone will respond to you as best we can. And we're going to monitor throughout the conversation for questions. And we do aim to answer all questions by text and have a few speakers live. We do have live Spanish interpretation, which is being provided by the talented Daniela Smerinsky of NYU Law, and portions of today's briefing will be in Spanish only. So whether you are a monolingual Spanish or English speaker, we ask that you go ahead and look down at the little globe and select your preferred language using the globe icon. And as we mentioned, this is being recorded and will be shared on YouTube so that people can come back and see it. So now I'd love to turn to thank our partners and hosts. We have lots of people registered, which is fantastic. And we particularly want to just turn our eyes to Congress, where people who have been brave for years have stood with us and are standing with us now and co-hosting with us. And we also, of course, acknowledge that we're in the middle of a coup and a second impeachment. So thank you to everyone who's finding your way here from the halls of Congress. And I am going to, let's see. So we want to thank Representatives Nadler and Velasquez, who we'll hear from later, and Representative Clark. We especially think of Representative Jayapal, who tested positive for COVID after being exposed by her evil colleagues who refused to mask while they were forced in a room during the coup attempt. We also thank our partners in other organizations like the Immigrant Justice Center, Immigrant Rights Clinic at NYU School of Law, New Sanctuary Coalition, Migrant Justice, and the Immigrant Justice Network. So for today's briefing, clearly, the people who are charged with keeping our country safe have been wasting their time on us, time and resources. And there's more that we can say about this, and we will, but for now, we're just going to keep this moving. So we know the immigration system is a racist, white supremacist institution, and that's evidenced by how Black and Latinx immigrant leaders are disproportionately detained and deported and surveilled for our activism. And retaliation against immigrants is part of a broader campaign to stamp out dissent in our community, and then to also undermine core tenets of our democracy. US citizens, journalists, humanitarian aid workers, lawyers, and protests have also faced arrest, interrogation, and surveillance for their efforts in defense of the rights and human dignity of immigrants. And that too has happened with me. And if you're curious about my story, I can link to something that can tell you a little bit more with that, including when I, as a faith leader, encouraged faith leaders to do work at the border and was placed on DHS's secret surveillance list called Operation Secure Line, which many of us who are on the call have also been placed on. Okay, so brief overview of what's about to happen. Law students will share the Immigrant Rights Voices website featuring an interactive map highlighting a widespread campaign by federal agencies to stamp out dissenting voices in immigrant communities. And then we're going to hear from our speakers about their stories of retaliation and targeting, and why it's critical for Congress and the administration to hold ICE and other agencies accountable and to the right and wrongs of the Trump, no, there aren't any rights, but the wrongs of the Trump administration. And then we'll hear from Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez about why she is supporting efforts to protect immigrant voices. So now I'm going to turn this over to our law students, Jirayu and Eleuthera.
Thank you, Kaji. So before we move into the rest of the programming for this afternoon, we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that several activists and immigrant rights leaders are not able to join us today as a result of their targeting and their deportation. Deportations are one of the main tools that ICE and DHS are using to prevent people from being with us here today, and also are tools that are being used to cause irreparable harm to the well-being of targeted activists, their loved ones, their communities, and the immigrant rights movement as a whole. I'd like to first share the story of Claudio Rojas, who is an immigrant rights activist who's lived in the United States for nearly 20 years with his wife, children, and grandchild. And in 2019, the documentary film, The Infiltrators, featured his work in exposing abuses at a Florida immigration detention center. And shortly after the film was premiered at Sundance, he was detained by ICE at a routine check-in and deported a month later. His application for a visa for a victim of labor trafficking was still pending at the time.
So during the pandemic, immigrants have been very vocal about human rights violations in detention centers specifically. Hector Garcia Mendoza was one of them. In May 2020, he was a key witness in a lawsuit filed against ICE, DHS, and CoreCivic, a private prison corporation. 4 days after the suit was filed, Hector was transferred and then deported to a deadly area in Mexico, despite expressing a fear of return. Hector has since disappeared, and his community has been unable to reach him. Hector's deportation follows a clear pattern. This month marks 3 years since Jean Montreville, a loving father, partner, and co-founder of New Sanctuary Coalition, was deported after speaking out against immigrant rights violations. In Haiti, he lacks the communications infrastructure he needs to participate remotely today in this briefing, or even to remain connected to his family here in the United States. We'll now hear a statement from Jean's teenage son, Josiah, on the effect that his father's deportation has had on him. Josiah's statement will be read to us by Deanna Rosen, one of the clinic advocates working to bring Jean home. And for more information about how you can join Josiah in the campaign to bring his father home, you can visit www.bringjeanhome.org.
Thank you, and I'll now read Josiah's letter. God will never give you more than you can handle. That's a quote I used to hear a lot growing up. That's weird for me to say. It feels like just the other day, I was 12 and my dad was walking me into Brooklyn Tech for the first day. But now I'm 17 and almost done with high school. I'm going to be leaving with a few more friends, a lot more knowledge, but one less parent. And that's fine. Do I wish he'd been there to pick me up and surprise me with an undoubtedly corny yet thoughtful gift, and then take us all out to Dave & Buster's? Of course. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wish he were here right now. But I'm fine. To quote Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And to quote the Black Panther, as you can see, I am not dead. So every morning I am given a choice. I can either let all of the world's challenges bring me down, or I could face those challenges, overcome them, and walk away stronger. Real quick, let me just explain that when I volunteered to write this, it was recommended that I write about how having my father deported has affected me. But to be honest, I'm not the best storyteller. However, I do have a thing for non-story based writing. So while I could try my best to describe to you guys the feeling of agony and pain I felt when I first heard the news, then the emptiness and depression I went through after. See, I could bring you all down with that, but the way I see it, I was given the choice to either inspire or narrate. And inspiration is more my style. So how has my dad's deportation affected me? It's definitely made life more interesting, to say the least. It's definitely changed my outlook on life. Up until then, I was childish, which isn't a bad thing because I was a child. But that woke me up. It was the first time in my life where I couldn't just expect things to go back to normal a month later. Before that, if I ever had a problem, mommy and daddy would make sure to have it fixed as soon as possible. But time passed and he wasn't back yet. I didn't know what to do. I was halfway through freshman year. The work was becoming gradually harder. I was considered gifted all throughout middle school, but then now I got to do all this work and I can't understand half of it. And if that wasn't enough, all I could think about was how I could get my dad back. Eventually, I just gave up on school and on getting him back. It took my mom forcing me to crunch in a semester's worth of work into a week for me to realize that I was just making things worse. I never once thought about how this made my mom feel or my dad. I was becoming the one thing I told myself I'd never be, a statistic. Most statistics say that a Black boy raised in a single mom household will end up either on the streets, a dropout, or in jail. On the path I was going, I could have ended up being any one of the three. But I'm determined to prove the statistics wrong. No matter how hard or how long it takes, I will make a name for myself. I remember one day I asked my dad what he wanted. He replied, "I want my name on a building." So that's the goal. Actually, that is a promise. That one day he'll be able to look up and see the name Montreville on a building. I'd like to end with a quote. No matter what life throws at you, you and only you get to decide what to do next. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Diana, for reading Josiah's statement. Jean, Claudio, and Hector's cases and stories are really part of a broader pattern of ICE and DHS using deportation and the threat of deportation to silence activists and whistleblowers and human rights leaders. There's many among us that have faced state-sanctioned exile for exercising our right to speak, and this is a non-exhaustive list of the number of immigrants who have faced retaliation in the recent years. And I'll turn it back over to Kaji. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so what I'd like to do now is to transition us to understand, first of all, the names on the screen demonstrate how federal retaliation against immigrants is nationwide. It's nothing new. And what I'm going to do now is, it's still wrong though, like just to point that out. But what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Matt Nussbaum and Rachel Marmont, who are third-year law students from the Immigrant Rights Clinic at NYU Law. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaji. I'm Matt Nussbaum. I'm a law student at NYU's Immigrant Rights Clinic. And alongside the New Sanctuary Coalition and other immigrant rights activists, members of our clinic have been working to highlight the issue of retaliation against immigrant rights defenders throughout the US. We created a data set and an interactive mapping website on immigrantRightsVoices.org, conglomerating every instance of retaliation that we could find to explore those patterns and give voice to those who were targeted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and show you what this map looks like so we can discuss the patterns that we've found. So here is the map itself, and the yellow bubbles represent individual instances of retaliation. As you can see, we've collected 1,015 incidents of retaliation. And to be clear, this is just scratching the surface. These are just the incidents that we've been able to find from public reporting. And there are certainly more examples of government agencies retaliating against immigrant rights activists that have been hidden from public view. So looking at the map as a whole, it's clear how this pattern and practice of retaliation cuts across different agencies, geographic areas, types of people, and organizations. While those most affected are immigrants who have been increasingly subject to detention and deportation, government agencies have also retaliated against US citizens, journalists, humanitarian aid workers, lawyers, and protesters. As you can see, this retaliation comes in many different forms, ranging from surveillance of protesters to border detentions to criminal prosecutions to deportation. But in general, this map and the data it represents show an increasingly politicized agency that is out of control and engaging in egregious, widespread abuses. However, DHS is not just acting alone. They're also using other entities like state DMVs, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, foreign authorities, and state and local police to expand their authority. And in doing so, they actually contravene the authority and legitimate work of other agencies. I'm going to show you one example right here of Delmer Ramirez Palma. So the Department of Labor wanted to interview Delmer Ramirez Palma, who is a worker and a whistleblower who reported unsafe conditions at the Hard Rock Cafe in New Orleans, which eventually collapsed. However, ICE deported him before the Department of Labor had a chance to follow up on their investigation. So what ICE and DHS view as law enforcement is clearly contrary to some of the most cherished principles that we hold, including First Amendment rights. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rachel, to speak about some of the broader trends we found in our research.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Rachel Maremont, and I'm also a student in the Immigrant Rights Clinic at NYU Law School. Part of what the map that Matt was just showing you demonstrates is that if you look behind every major scandal that this administration has had with regard to immigrant rights issues, that retaliation is a major part of that story. So the family separation crisis is not just about the horrific human rights abuses inflicted on parents and children at the border, but it's also about the mass surveillance of those who have spoken out against these policies. In 2018, working with a private contractor, DHS was able to gather information about more than 600 protests across the country going on to speak out against the abuses committed by the administration. The accounts of women being forced to undergo unwanted gynecological procedures at the Irwin Detention Center in Georgia is not only about the fact that people in ICE custody underwent non-consensual and invasive medical procedures, but it's also about the fact that ICE attempted to cover their tracks by attempting to deport the victims of this abuse shortly after the scandal broke. And the ongoing COVID-19 crisis in ICE detention facilities across the country is not only about the rampant spread of the virus in overcrowded and unsanitary facilities where social distancing is impossible, but it's also about the retaliation that those who have spoken out against those dangerous conditions have faced. As documented on the map, ICE's actions have ranged from placing those who speak out about these conditions in punitive solitary confinement to deporting them in violation of court orders. Across each of these scandals and beyond, ICE and DHS's inner workings are obscured from the public and even from elected officials, both because of the lack of transparency that has come to characterize these agencies and because of the very tactics that they use, seeking to silence those who would speak out against them, make accountability that much more difficult. So as we look to much needed change in the administration ahead, we must ensure that we seek broader accountability for the harms done, and we listen carefully to those who have been targeted for who they are and what they stand for, and look to their continued leadership on these issues. To that end, we're so grateful to have our panelists here today to tell their stories. I'll turn it back over to Kaji.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And so I'm really honored to be here. We all are with folks who are going to tell us what we need to know. And the first is Kike Balthazar, who is an organizer with migrant justice and one of the principal architects of Milk with Dignity, which is a program that improves conditions in the dairy industry. And Kike and other members of migrant justice were targeted by ICE for detention and deportation in coordination with the local DMV. And just want to remind you that you can now, I think we might be in a better place now with this. You can select your language using the globe button at the bottom of the screen for interpretation. And Kike, over to you. Gracias, Kike.
¿Pueden escucharme?
Sí.
Perfecto. Estoy ahora.
Hola.
Yes, perfect. I can be heard now. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Enrique Balcazar. I'm part of the migrant community in Vermont, and I am part of the Migrant for Justice organization that is an organization that organizes the milk workers who are immigrants in this state. Migrant Justice is an organization
Construir la voz, la capacidad y el poder de la comunidad.
here to help build up the strength of the community to be able to defend the human rights in the state. We've had many campaigns to be able to succeed in this. We've been able to get driver's license for us. We've been able to create a program to make agreements with companies that buy milk so that they also take responsibility over the lack of human rights in this area. And in many more things that we've done. But in 2016, we've been organizing for 10 years in the state. But in 2016, when we were under Obama's administration still, our organization suffered from vigilance and targeting by ICE in Vermont. From 2016 to 2018, 40 people who were involved in our organization were detained, and many of them were deported. Within these people, I was also one who was detained by 4 undercover agents in March of 2017 when I was leaving from our organization's office. They were targeting me, they were watching me, they were surveilling me, and they looked for my information using the DMV, the Vermont DMV. In total, I was detained for 11 days in a detention center. And thanks to the mobilization of the community in the state and a national level, I was able to get out of detention. But these attacks, they really had a very grave impact to our community, very sad impact. We're a small community in a rural state, and this brought with it even more fear. And many of our members, they didn't want to organize anymore against the abuses that they suffer on the street or in their workplace because they were scared of ICE. So we've lived this in firsthand, and we know what it feels like. And yes, that's my story.
Gracias, Kike. So thank you so much for being with us, and we are just going to remind you that you can click on the interpretation button if you want to hear the interpretation. It sounds like we have it up and running. Thank you so much, Daniela, for fixing that. I know I was having issues earlier too. Okay, so our next person, I'm so excited also to introduce you to Alejandra Pablos, who's a social justice organizer, activist, and a writer who works at the intersection of repro rights and immigrant justice and is based in Arizona. And in 2018, Alejandra led demonstrations at a peaceful protest outside of the DHS, where she was later singled out and detained by DHS agents. And she's been targeted by ICE for deportation and is fighting for her freedom. Ale, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alejandra. I use pronouns she and hers. I am in Phoenix, Arizona, Autumnland. I'm a community organizer. I'm a storyteller. And all of this happened because of this deportation case when I got picked up by ICE in 2011. In 2011, I didn't know much about what was happening in our own backyard. I didn't know about the racial profiling happening in Phoenix. I'm from Tucson. In 2011, I was very oblivious. And when I walked into the hands of ICE and the hands of Eloy staff in Arizona, one of the, obviously all detention centers are awful and should be abolished. But when I came into Eloy, that's when I really understood what was happening. And I just started immediately advocating for myself and for people inside. I ended up being at Eloy and in deportation proceedings for 2 years without any opportunity to come home. I was not bondable. I was mandatory detention and mandatory deportation because of the charges that I got. So I've been going in and out of jails, in and out of court systems, trying to fight for my dignity, trying to move on from what has happened. And I became an organizer, and I became somebody who here locally in Arizona advocates and shares her story unapologetically about being incarcerated. And in order to share our stories so we can shift narrative, shift culture, so we can abolish ICE, so we can rebuke that culture of policing and incarceration and deportation. So I think for me, since the beginning of the Department of Homeland Security, since the beginning of its inception, it's only been there to assault the dignity and the rights of people like myself, other people that are undocumented, mixed status families. It's only created to target and deport and incarcerate. So we're in this moment where under this both Democrat and Republican administrations, DHS has been able to do a lot of what it just feels like doing through raids to arrest. And a lot of our communities, especially people seeking asylum and protection, have been impacted by that. So I think it's really important. This is why I share my story. I was also, because of my advocacy, I was arrested in Virginia by DHS cops when I was practicing dissent. I was at a peaceful protest, like Kaji said. But again, over and over again, they intimidate us, they arrest us so we don't go out there in the streets. When I got locked up again after that arrest, I was forced to turn myself in with my mother, holding her hand and walking into the hands of ICE because they just said I was classified wrong. Over and over again, they do whatever. Thank you. They do whatever they want, and again, when I was inside, they silenced me again inside and told me that I wouldn't get a bond hearing, right? They told me that the judge would get really upset and deny any relief that I would ask for, or that they would keep me and without bond. So it's really, really scary. And just to see this list that y'all put up of everybody who's been targeted in proceedings, it broke my heart. And I'm just blessed enough that I have community where I can feel safe in sharing my story. And this is why I'm here asking folks to really protect people, especially in red states, and we will talk a little bit more about that, but I'm going to keep sharing my story, and I'm going to keep, rebuking the shame and the fear. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm excited to share a little bit more.
Thank you very, very much. We're just so grateful to you and Kike. And now I'm going to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Ravi Rugbeer, who is one of New York City's and the nation's best known immigrant activists. And 3 years, almost to the day right now, Ravi was detained at a regularly scheduled check-in with ICE, and he's a longtime permanent resident, community activist, father, and husband. And Ravi, and also leader of New Sanctuary Coalition. I give it to you.
Thank you, Kaji. Yes, you mentioned that 2 days ago, January 11th, made it 3 years when they shackled me and ripping me away from my loved ones, my wife, my family, my friends, my community. I spent all day on 11 trying to come up with a post And I'm not, when I said all day, I spent recording, re-recording what my thoughts were on that day. And I couldn't bring anything to mind because it evokes so many emotions, so much trauma, that I never got to the point where I could have posted anything. It was extremely violent. It was extremely deliberate. Traumatic is the word I'm looking for. Now, I want to talk about when I was in detention, when they were taking me away on January 11th. They sent me to Florida, and I was in Orange County. One of the things I've learned when I was there is that everyone in detention had basically given up because they did not know that they were relief, there were a possibility that they could stay here if they fought fought in court to be able to stay in the country. And that is when ICE talks about the right way to do things, they're not giving people the information and the direction on how they can stay in this country. By the way, I need to vent for 1 second. When we complained, every time everyone in detention complains about the food and the conditions, nothing has changed. I don't know if I'm right, but did I hear that the judge says that this idiot in Arizona can get organic food? How effed up is that? And I'm angry, right? Because that shows the white privilege of our situation. So why did I'm going to not stop venting. So why did ICE actually take me away? Because I was teaching people about the ways that they can challenge their deportation, that they have a right to stay here in this country. I showed them strategies and tactics that will enable them to be within that community and to not get deported. And so that ICE wanted to stop me because they knew that if I'm not here, it will be easy to remove people. I also engaged the citizen community. So we partnered with the citizens who, so that they will support those who are going through this process. I just mentioned white privilege. Well, white privilege can also be used to help impacted people like myself. And we were using this, especially as part of the accompaniment program, to push back against ICE. In fact, many of our elected officials accompanied me to ICE, and that caused ICE to really be put on notice. Congresswoman Clark, Congresswoman Yvette Nydia Velasquez, we had city officials, they all were present because they accompanied me through that. And this is part of the problem. When people hear what is happening, they see the injustice, they know that this has to change. ICE was also very deliberate that they knew it was going to be public. They didn't try to hide this. They wanted this to happen because the more stories got out there that Ravi had all of this community support and that Ravi was still deported. You know, when I was in in Chrome Detention Center, I was sitting across the officers and hearing them say that, oh, there's a stay of removal. There's all of these reasons why we were told not to deport him, but we are going to deport him. In fact, they put me on the van to take me to the airport to be sent to Trinidad. Again, the reason is that if they were able to deport Ravi, who had such support from his friends like Kaji and like Alina and you heard Rachel and Shirayu and Ilutra, if we had support from them and they could still deport Ravi, how much more people would be devastated because they didn't have that support. How the immigrant community will be defeated even more. So I stop here because we have a lot to cover, and I pass it back to Kaji.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for sharing. And it's, I think for people who are just starting to hear these stories for the first time, it's just very arresting. So I want to remind people that if you have questions, which we're going to turn to now, please do put them in the Q&A. We're which is where we will see them. So you don't have to raise your hand. You can just put them in the questions. And my first question is going to be for Ale. So egregious human rights violations at detention centers have come to the forefront during this pandemic, and medical neglect and malnutrition and retaliation against immigrants who are detained, however, is not unique to 2020, and it will continue in 2021, pandemic or not. Ali, I was wondering if you could speak to recent movements led by immigrants in detention. What are folks in detention demanding? What forms of retaliation are people facing for speaking out? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'm just super honored to be here and to be able to speak about the bravery and the work and the advocacy of people that are detained. Because like I said before, when I was re-detained again and had to go back for another 43 days simply for being arrested at a protest, I was really, really scared. And, I again, thought that I wouldn't get out again, right? So that really shifts and impacts a person inside. So the folks inside that I've seen, that I've supported, there's a lot of folks here in Arizona. We built a Arizona Free the Mall coalition here to try to support folks, from La Palma, for example, a lot of folks that are at high risk that tried to advocate for themselves during COVID and put out letters so we can support them on the outside so they can come home. And we had little success. Right. So I think folks inside have always been speaking up. We heard a little bit about folks that spoke against the hysterectomies, and immediately people are in Mexico right now that spoke out after the story came out. So I think it's very important for us to be able to support folks from the inside, because without us in the outside community, it's very, very difficult. Right. When I was inside, we hardly had access to anybody outside. If we didn't have families or we didn't have a community organization working at the detention center, we had nobody. And so I think it's just so honorable, all the work that folks are doing. I think our comrade Maru out in the Northwest, the Northwest Detention Center, right, really, really building a coalition so strong that they're about to shut that center down. And that really also pisses ICE off, right? And they try to do as much as they can to really separate the community from the folks inside. But I think, again, we're going to keep doing as much as possible to get folks that are high risk to come home. We're going to keep, centering the stories of people that are incarcerated, especially here in Arizona. We're going to be targeting the Department of Corrections. We're going to be targeting ICE. So I think, again, just really, really centering those folks that are speaking out right now is super important. And I'm really excited to bring them back and talk a little bit more about the New Way Forward Act legislation that can also ensure that we bring everybody who's been hurt and impacted by immigration policies.
Thank you so much, Ale. And the next question is for Kike. So as a reminder that there is interpretation on the globe. So Kike, Migrant Justice reached a settlement with ICE back in November. Can you share more about what this means for you and other organizers with Migrant Justice? And what did the settlement achieve and what did it leave unresolved? What lasting change do you hope to see implemented as a result of the settlement?
Sí.
Yes. Yes. After the persecution that we lived in Vermont, we put in a demand against ICE, and this demand, it lasted 2 years, but we were able to come to an agreement in which we won many things that we had wanted, we had fought for. Within these things, we were able to terminate our deportation cases. There were 3 of us in total, and also the whole group, Migrant Justice, and they were able to close our cases. We were also able to get 5 years of a work permit, and we were able to get indemnification for all of the harm that was caused by ICE, compensation for that. And another thing that was extremely important for us is that ICE made an agreement to protect our First Amendment right under the Constitution. And so within this, ICE called to the attention to their agents in Vermont that they have to respect the First Amendment of the Constitution. And without doubt, this is going to be precedent for other communities and other groups of workers to defend their own rights when there are these types of persecution and this type of targeting due to activism. I think that this is a clear example. We're a clear example in which workers can fight for their own rights and against the repression from ICE. The agreement allows us to keep working, keep doing our organizing work in the community to advance the rights in these states. And we can also go to the places where we need to work, knowing that they're not pursuing us, and we don't have to live in this type of fear that we were living in when we were being persecuted. We can also have our events and our meetings in order to maintain the migrant justice organization and to ensure that the community knows each other and is able to maintain our tight community within the state of Vermont. The agreement, it doesn't give me permanent status, so we're still suffering. And I wonder what's going to happen after all of this ends. If one day I'm going to be able to resolve all of this, my immigration situation, and the compensation. Well, the compensation. It truly does not replace the suffering and the impact that we had to us and to our family. ICE, it has given this guide to the ICE agents that they have to protect our First Amendment right, but of course we in reality we don't really trust it, because at the end of the day, they feel now obligated to do it because of this agreement, but we don't think that this is the solution in the long term, because there are going to be cases in which groups or activists, individual activists, they won't be able to make the kind of demands that we made because they don't have the resources in order to require an agency like ICE to make these kind of agreements. And so that's what that means for us.
Muchas gracias, Kike. Okay, so the next question is, and I'll ask this of any panelist, what are the most important steps that Congress can take to put a stop to the retaliation of immigrants who exercise their right to free speech? And I would also just add to that question, which came from the audience, not just Congress, but the incoming Biden administration, and anybody who wants to answer. Kike, if you want to start, or, since you're on screen, anyone.
Cool. Okay.
Sí. Okay.
Creo que
I think one of the things that we would ask for from members of Congress is that when somebody is detained, to help them, give them the resources that they need to be able to get out of detention. For example, in my case, my Congress member was able to ask for my release when members of my community asked for it. And obviously that had an impact on the decision of ICE to let me go. Our organization is also asking about the attacks against activists, and it's essential that we take steps to protect those of us who are on the front lines organizing. But we have to also remember that there are more than 11 million people that are living in the shadows, and that they are constantly being persecuted daily. We're just one part of that. We're just part of those leaders from our communities that are on the front lines that we see these injustices in the workplace, on the streets, related to the abuses of the immigration authorities. But we do this because it's important for us that our community doesn't have to live under these abuses, but in reality, there needs to be a change now.
Gracias, Kike. And Ale, if you could talk a bit about New Way Forward, and thank you.
Yeah, hey everyone, Alejandra here. I also want to just shout out on my political homes. I want to say I am a member of Mi Gente. I'm a member of Detention Watch Network. I'm representing also the Immigrant Justice Network here. I'm on the advisory board as a person who's in deportation proceedings. And I'm just really, really thankful of the connections and the support of people, because again, without community, people get deported and disappear, and and that's not going to happen with us. So I'm just really thankful for that community. And I think the first immediate thing that pops in my head, of course, when we're talking about Congress acting is just, clearly it's so limited, but I think the biggest thing that we have in front of us is concrete legislation. Again, laws on our bodies and on our lives are impacting our everyday people, everyday life, right? It's separating families, and its policy work is super important. And I'm very, very proud to be a part of the New Way Forward Act, which is in the House. Representative Chuy Garcia from Chicago, Illinois is sponsoring it, with many brilliant people that are sponsoring it, and we need y'all's help to get your representatives to also sponsor. First and foremost, as we await executive and legislative action during the first 100 days of the new Biden administration, we must make sure that these are bold and inclusive as possible. As a person who has, a criminalized past, who has felonies, we've been, left to the side, we've been ignored on, or whatever it has been, but no longer can that happen. We must make sure that people that are criminalized are at the front. So I encourage everybody to follow the Immigrant Justice Network, follow that we're going to be launching the bill again in a couple of weeks coming up. So this bill really restores due process that's needed, right? It ends mandatory detention, it ends mandatory deportation. It really protects communities by really ending police interaction with ICE, allowing them to act like ICE officers, right? It really ends racial profiling, and I think it's a big way to deconstruct the machine, the deportation machine. I just encourage everybody to read more about it. I don't want to take more time, but we can drop the link possibly. And again, we must encourage people, especially I'm from Arizona. You know what's happening. We have a really famous writer out there in the news. And I think while people are getting to play around with our lives and up in the Capitol, people like me are still fighting to just be left alone, right? So I think it's super important right now in Arizona to watch what's happening in Arizona and support all political prisoners. There's a coalition of Black organizers and immigrant people that are fighting these political prosecutions, because again, they're meant to silence us, meant to put us in the shadows, and we're no longer going to be there. We understand that we are reaching the goals of abolition right now. So thank you all, and please follow my story at keepalefi.org as well.
Amen. And if we can drop that in the chat, or if we don't have chat, oops, I don't know. But can you say it again, how they can find you?
Yeah, I can drop it in the chat. Keepale.
Oh, you can. Yes, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Really grateful to you, Alejandra. And okay, we're gonna put it in the Q&A. Thank you, Tequila. Okay, so I also want to ask Ravi if you could talk to us about two specific other ways that we could do this with private bills, and also with dear colleague letters.
Thank you, Kaji. Yes, not just their colleague letters, but in actuality, letters to, you heard Kiki talk about letters to the ICE officers, but it doesn't come only from the congressional reps. The others who are on this call, our community needs to reach out to the congressional reps and to show them that they have your support when they reach out to ICE. So Congress can write letters on behalf of and to ICE to stop someone. They can actually use those same letters to engage other congressional reps in their area, in their state, and or other colleagues. So a Dear Colleague letter, which is about others who support or of like kind and mind to come together to about a particular case or about a particular issue. But a lot of people actually don't know about private bills, and especially under this administration, that has been ignored, where a congressional rep can submit a request for a private bill. So let's say, for instance, Ali, they can submit a private bill for her saying that they will make her stop her deportation and give her back a green card. That is possible. That is possible. What is also possible is that the congressional reps can stay someone's removal by a request to ICE, but that was taken away in this administration. They need to take back that authority. Congress needs to take back that authority, especially on this matter. And there was a question about violence under this administration. It is much more violent under this administration. There was very little negotiation, and you could not engage with them because they had a mandate to remove everyone. I call it ethnic cleansing, and we have seen that. So there was no negotiation. It was immediate. It was intense. We hope that that will change under the new administration. Kaji?
Thank you so much, Ravi. Okay, so what we'd like to do now, we have remarks from Representative Nydia Velasquez, which we're going to see now.
Good afternoon. I'm Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez from New York's 7th Congressional District. I want to thank New York University Law Immigrant Rights Clinic, New Sanctuary Coalition, and all the other sponsors of today's briefing. A few years ago, during the height of Trump's anti-immigrant agenda, I invited Robbie Ragbir and his wife, Amy, to accompany me at the State of the Union address in Washington. Just days earlier, Robbie was taken into custody as a part of a troubling pattern of the Trump administration, purposely detaining immigrants' rights advocates because of their outspokenness in the fight for a more just immigration system. After Robbie's detention, I joined his wife, Amy, at a rally outside of the ICE building in Manhattan to send a strong message to Donald Trump that we will not be intimidated by his administration's fear tactics towards immigrants. It is why I then wrote a letter demanding a meeting with top Trump administration officials to push for transparency and accountability in their targeting of activists critical of Donald Trump. Now, we are just days away from shutting the doors on the dark Trump era. Ahead, we will continue to fight for humane immigration policies that expand pathways to citizenship and promote opportunities, not deny them. I would like to recognize everyone joining this briefing today. Please know that my office is a resource and that my staff are here to assist you. Thank you, stay safe, and onward.
And thank you so much to Representative Velasquez and her staff and to all of our co-sponsors for today. Thank you. And so we know that we do have people from congressional offices on today. So we want to know how we can support you in your office. If you're here, it's because you care. And we want to know how we can support you in uplifting these issues. So we're pulling to our time of a close. And obviously, I mean, this has been a week that's been each day is a year, right? So, I mean, just thinking of the monumental events of the past week where Georgia elected a Black senator and the son of Jewish immigrants for the first time in its history. And these historic wins were led by and made possible by this coalition of Black and Latinos and Asian immigrant activism and movement building. And a white supremacist-led coup attempt which I think was kind of a rehearsal, that was incited by a racist president whose political movement is motivated by a fear of immigrant power. While we see that the real thing to fear is not the immigrant community, the Black community, it's not poor people, it is white supremacy, which I have learned to start calling white inferiority complex. So the Biden administration really, and the new Congress, are at a point where they can have an unprecedented referendum on our democracy and the health of our democratic institutions. And immigrants have been at the forefront of the defense of our core democratic institutions, from the vote to equality before the law to the census and all the other things that we see. Most things in this country seem to be tested out, oppressive techniques on immigrants and Black people and those intersections therein. And our system really depends on the ability for all of us to participate and debate and have real ownership in public dialogue. Immigrant rights and voices have to be protected for the health and progress of our democracy. The Democratic Party, therefore, must fulfill its own commitment to protecting immigrant voices. So, the 2020 DNC platform statement commits to prohibiting enforcement actions that deter access to justice at courthouses and repress freedom of speech and assembly. But that commitment's not in isolation. It has to be within a broader vision of a 21st century immigration system that embraces our values. And we're not even saying comprehensive immigration reform, right? And we can't fall back on policies that criminalize immigrants by their deservedness. There's no good, bad immigrant. We must end immigration detention and immigration enforcement as it's currently conceived. So if you're a congressional office, in closing, what we're saying is we're asking you to take a look at the map, see if there's been retaliation in your district. And if it has happened, contact us so that we can put you in touch with the activists who've been targeted and the organizations that support them. And then if you're a member of the community, I know there were many more questions we weren't able to get to, but we will, because we are a community. So we're gonna stay in touch. And if you're experiencing or witnessing retaliation or you wanna help, please do contact us to be included in the map or in our advocacy efforts. It's 3 o'clock, we're gonna close. Thank you, God bless you, and let's survive and thrive.